A paralyzed billionaire, a desperate therapist, a lie worth billions. When Claire Whitmore accepted the most lucrative job of her career, she thought she was saving a broken man. She was wrong. Ethan Carrington isn't paralyzed. He's playing the most dangerous game in corporate America, and she's the perfect pawn. Trapped in his mansion, drowning in secrets and suffocating attraction, Claire discovers the truth too late. Some men don't need to be healed. They need to be stopped. Welcome to a story where nothing is what it seems, and trust is the deadliest currency of all. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving Claire Whitmore standing alone in front of iron gates that belonged in a different century. Beyond them, the Carrington estate sprawled across what had to be 15 acres of manicured perfection, all geometric hedges and imported marble. The main house rose like a monument to excess, every window reflecting the late afternoon sun back at her in blinding sheets of gold. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag and tried not to feel like an imposter. The intercom crackled before she could reach for the button. "Miss Whitmore?" "Yes." "Come to the main entrance." The gate swung open with a whisper of expensive machinery. Claire walked up a driveway that curved through sculptured gardens, past fountains that probably cost more than her education. Her sneakers, practical, comfortable, utterly wrong for this place, squeaked against the spotless pavement. The woman who met her at the door wore a charcoal suit that screamed efficiency and no tolerance for nonsense. Late 50s, silver hair pulled back so tight it had to hurt, eyes that cataloged Claire in 2 seconds flat and found her wanting. "I'm Margaret Hale, Mr. Carrington's head of household." "Not housekeeper, head of household." "You're late." Claire checked her phone. "I'm 3 minutes early." "You were instructed to arrive at 2 o'clock. It's 2:03. Margaret turned without waiting for a response. "Follow me. Touch nothing." The interior made the exterior look modest. Marble floors stretched in every direction, interrupted by columns that served no structural purpose, and antique furniture that probably had its own insurance policy. Claire caught a glimpse of herself in a gilded mirror and looked away quickly. Her reflection didn't belong here. They passed through rooms designed to intimidate, a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a dining room that could seat 30, a gallery hung with original paintings Claire recognized from art history textbooks. Margaret's heels clicked a steady rhythm. Claire's sneakers continued their embarrassing squeak. "You've reviewed the contract?" Margaret asked without turning around. "Yes." "All 73 pages?" Claire had skimmed. She'd needed to skim. The job posting had appeared on the private medical staffing board at 2 in the morning, and she'd submitted her application before her brain could catalog all the reasons it was too good to be true. Live-in physical therapist for a high-profile patient. 6 months guaranteed. Salary that would erase her debt and leave enough for a fresh start. She'd had the phone interview 8 hours later. The formal offer arrived that afternoon. The contract came with a deadline. Sign and appear for work within 48 hours, or the position would go to the next candidate. Claire had signed. She'd had exactly $17 in her checking account and a collection agency that had stopped accepting her promises to pay. "I reviewed everything," she said. "Then you understand the non-disclosure agreement is binding in perpetuity. You may not discuss anything you see, hear, or learn in this house. Not with family, not with friends, not with future employers. Mr. Carrington's privacy is absolute." "I understand." "You'll reside in the East Wing. Your suite is private, but all common areas are monitored." Margaret glanced back, and her expression suggested she could see straight through Claire's professional smile to the desperation underneath. "You will not wander. You will not explore. You will not ask questions outside the scope of your medical duties. Is that clear?" "Crystal." They reached a set of double doors at the end of a long hallway. Margaret stopped, turned, and looked at Claire with something that might have been pity if it had been warmer. "Mr. Carrington is not an easy man," she said. "The last 3 therapists quit within a week." Claire's stomach dropped. The contract mentions everything that matters legally. I'm telling you what matters practically." Margaret's hand rested on the door handle. "He's in pain. He's angry. And he doesn't suffer fools or false sympathy. If you cry, you're done. If you pity him, you're done. If you treat him like he's broken, You're done faster. I don't pity patients, Claire said. I fix them. Something flickered across Margaret's face. Approval, maybe, or doubt. She opened the door. The room beyond was massive, probably a formal drawing room converted into a medical suite. Hospital bed, monitoring equipment, parallel bars, treatment table, all top of the line, all arranged with the kind of precision that suggested Margaret had personally overseen every detail. Late afternoon light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked gardens worthy of a landscape painting, and in the wheelchair position near those windows sat Ethan Carrington. Claire had done her research, obviously. She'd found the news articles, the business profiles, the carefully curated photographs. None of them had prepared her for the reality. He was younger than she'd expected, 35, maybe 36, with the kind of face that belonged on currency. Sharp jaw, aristocratic nose, eyes so dark they looked black from across the room. His hair was slightly too long, as though he'd fired anyone who suggested a trim. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that definitely didn't belong to a man who'd been immobile for months. He didn't look at her. He was reading something on a tablet, his attention absolutely fixed on the screen, and the dismissal was so complete it actually stung. Margaret cleared her throat. Mr. Carrington, this is Claire Whitmore, your new physical therapist. Is she deaf? His voice was exactly what Claire should have expected. Cold, precise, expensive. He still didn't look up. I'm assuming she can hear you, which means she doesn't need you to announce her presence. Of course. Margaret's expression didn't change, but Claire saw her shoulders tighten. Miss Whitmore, I'll show you to your quarters after Mr. Carrington's initial assessment. She left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded unnervingly final. Claire stood there, bag in hand, waiting. Ethan continued reading. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of test. Fine. She'd start. Mr. Carrington. The standard introduction usually includes credentials. He still didn't look at her. I'm assuming you have some, or my hiring team has become catastrophically incompetent. Claire set her bag down carefully. I have a doctorate in physical therapy from Columbia. I specialized in neurological rehabilitation and spinal cord injury recovery. I worked at Mount Sinai for 3 years before you were let go for a patient complaint. Her breath caught. That was dismissed. Dismissed isn't the same as disproven. He finally looked up, and the full force of his attention hit her like cold water. A patient accused you of causing unnecessary pain during treatment. The hospital administration found insufficient evidence to support the claim, but sufficient concern to encourage you to seek opportunities elsewhere. Did I miss anything? You missed the part where the patient had family money and threatened to pull a 7-figure donation if the hospital didn't fire me, Claire said evenly. You also missed the part where 3 other physical therapists reviewed my treatment notes and confirmed I'd followed protocol exactly. So you were right, but poor. I was right, and the patient was a spoiled sadist who got off on filing complaints. Something crossed Ethan's face. Not quite a smile, but close enough to count as movement. Spoiled sadist? That's your professional medical opinion? No, that's my personal assessment of a grown man who screamed at nurses and threw his lunch tray at an orderly because his massage wasn't hot enough. Claire crossed her arms. My professional opinion was that he had moderate soft tissue damage from a skiing accident and would recover fully with basic treatment. He did. Then he went back to Aspen and probably injured himself again doing something stupid. You don't like wealthy patients. I don't like patients who weaponize their wealth against people trying to help them. She met his eyes and didn't flinch. If that's going to be a problem, tell me now and save us both 6 months. The silence that followed felt different. Ethan studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. She'd been evaluated by attending physicians, judged by hospital boards, measured against impossible standards for years. This was nothing like that. This felt like being dissected. The previous therapists cried, he said finally. One of them lasted 90 minutes. She quit during the initial assessment, claimed I'd been verbally abusive. Were you? I told her she had weak hands and I'd felt more pressure from a massage chair. He tilted his head slightly. Is that abuse? Depends on your definition. Was it true? Completely. Then it was rude, not abusive. Claire picked up her bag again. Are you going to tell me I have weak hands? Are you going to cry if I do? No. I'm going to prove you wrong. This time he definitely smiled. It didn't reach his eyes, but his mouth curved with something that might have been genuine amusement. The contract says 6 months. If you last 1 week, I'll double your salary. Claire's heart kicked. Her salary was already obscene. Double would mean, no, don't think about it. Don't let him see he'd just hit the exact pressure point that would make you stay through anything. If I last 1 week, she said, you'll do your exercises without complaint and stop testing me like a first-year medical student. Deal. He set the tablet aside. Your quarters are in the East Wing, third door on the left. Margaret will have left your keycard and schedule. We start at 6 tomorrow morning. The contract said 8. The contract says your hours are subject to my medical needs. I need to start at 6. His eyes never left hers. Is that a problem? It was. She was exhausted, running on coffee and stress, and the kind of desperation that made bad decisions sound reasonable. But she'd signed a contract that gave him control over her schedule, and they both knew it. 6 is fine, she said. Good. Close the door on your way out. Dismissed. Again. Claire turned to leave, then stopped at the threshold and looked back. Mr. Carrington? What? The therapists who quit, did they leave because you were cruel or because they were incompetent? He considered the question with the same intensity he'd given her earlier. Both, he said finally. I was cruel because they were incompetent, and they were incompetent because they'd been hired for their discretion, not their skill. Then why did you hire me? I didn't. My team did, against my explicit instructions. Something dark moved behind his eyes. They thought you were qualified enough to be useful and desperate enough not to quit. The honesty was startling and insulting and absolutely accurate. They were right, Claire said. She left before he could respond. The East Wing was somehow both smaller and more luxurious than the main house. Claire's suite consisted of a bedroom larger than her entire previous apartment, a bathroom with heated floors and a tub that could double as a swimming pool, and a sitting room furnished with pieces that belonged in museums. Her suitcase sat on a bench at the foot of the bed. Someone had already unpacked it. Her clothes hung in a closet that made her secondhand wardrobe look even more pathetic than usual. Her toiletries were arranged on the bathroom counter with military precision. The violation should have bothered her more. Instead, she was too tired to care. She found the schedule Margaret had mentioned on the coffee table. 6 a.m. to noon, physical therapy session. Noon to 1 p.m., lunch, brought to your suite. 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., additional treatment is needed. 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., personal time. 6 p.m., dinner, formal dining room attendance required. 7 p.m. onward, on a call for medical emergencies. Attendance required at dinner. Of course. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, a bed so soft it felt like floating, and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from the collection agency. 2 text messages from her cousin asking if she was okay. 1 email from her bank warning her that her account was overdrawn. She deleted them all. Then she opened her banking app and stared at the pending deposit. First month's salary, already processed. Enough to pay off her credit cards, send money to her cousin for the rent she'd skipped, and still have enough left over to breathe. The relief was so intense it made her dizzy. She lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd start earning it. Tonight she'd let herself believe that maybe, possibly, she'd landed somewhere that wouldn't destroy her. She woke to darkness and the sound of raised voices. Claire sat up, disoriented. The bedside clock read 11:47 p.m. She'd slept for hours, still wearing her clothes, and now someone was shouting in a part of the house that should have been silent. The voices were male. One she recognized, Ethan, though she'd never heard that particular edge in his tone. The other was unfamiliar, deeper, angrier. Told you this was a mistake. Your opinion is noted and dismissed. She's a liability. She's a physical therapist, not a federal agent. She's an unknown, and unknowns get people killed. Claire crept to the door and opened it a crack. The voices were coming from somewhere down the hall, maybe the main house. She shouldn't listen. She definitely shouldn't investigate. She eased the door open and stepped into the hallway. The voices grew clearer as she moved closer. They were coming from a room near the junction between the East Wing and the main house, probably an office based on the faint glow of light under the door. Running out of time, the unfamiliar voice said. If they find out, they won't. You can't know that, and if they do, if they even suspect, then we adjust. We've adjusted before. Not with a stranger living in the house, not with someone who's going to be touching you, evaluating you, watching you for 6 months. Jesus, Ethan, do you understand what you're risking? A pause. Then Ethan's voice, colder than she'd heard it. Better than you do. Now get out. Claire turned and ran as quietly as she could back to her suite. She closed the door carefully and locked it, heart hammering. She's a liability. Unknowns get people killed. What the hell had she walked into? 6 a.m. came too early. Claire dragged herself out of bed, showered, dressed in the most professional athletic wear she owned, and made her way back to Ethan's suite with her mind still spinning through last night's conversation. She found him already positioned near the parallel bars, looking annoyingly alert for someone who'd apparently been up late arguing about liabilities and getting people killed. "You're on time," he observed. "Impressive. You pay well." "I'm motivated." Claire set down her bag and moved to the equipment she'd need. "We'll start with an assessment, range of motion, muscle response, pain levels, standard protocol. I've had 17 of these. They're all the same. Then this will be quick." She started with his upper body, shoulders, arms, chest. His muscle tone was excellent, better than it should have been for someone who'd been in a wheelchair for months. Physical therapy could maintain some conditioning, but this level suggested either obsessive dedication or something else entirely. Claire made notes without commenting. Then she moved to his legs. "I'll need you to transfer to the treatment table," she said. "No. I can't do a proper assessment with you in the chair." "Then do an improper one." Claire straightened. "Mr. Carrington." The other therapist managed. "The other therapist quit. I'm not interested in managing. I'm interested in results." She met his stare. "Treatment table. Now." For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Then, with obvious reluctance, he moved. The transfer was smooth, practiced, and revealed core strength that definitely shouldn't exist in a paralyzed patient. Claire filed that away too. She began the assessment with his left leg, palpating muscle groups, testing reflexes, evaluating joint mobility. Everything felt wrong. Not damaged wrong, concealed wrong. His muscles had tone. They responded to pressure. And when she moved his knee through a passive range of motion, she felt resistance that had nothing to do with injury. She moved to his right leg. Same results. "When were you injured?" she asked, keeping her voice neutral. 6 months ago, car accident, multiple spinal fractures, emergency surgery, permanent paralysis from the waist down. He recited it like a script. "The medical records are in your briefing file." I read them. She pressed her thumb into his quadricep, testing. "They said you had some preserved sensation. Minimal. Can you feel this?" "No." Liar. She watched his face carefully and increased the pressure. Nothing. Not a flicker. Either he was telling the truth or he had the best poker face she'd ever seen. Claire released his leg and stepped back. "I'll need to review the full medical history. Surgical notes, post-op reports, all imaging." "Why?" "Because the records I saw were summaries. I need details." "The details won't change the diagnosis. They'll change the treatment plan." She crossed her arms. "Unless you'd prefer I work blind and hope for the best." Another stare. This one lasted longer. "Margaret will provide the files," he said finally. "Anything else?" "Yes. Stop lying to me." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Excuse me? Your muscle tone is too good. Your reflexes are too responsive. And you're guarding your movements like someone trying not to reveal capability, not someone who's lost it." Claire kept her voice level. "I don't know what you're hiding, and frankly, I don't care. But if you want me to help you, I need you to stop treating this like a performance." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at her with eyes that had gone completely flat. "Get out," he said quietly. "Mr. Carrington, get out." Claire grabbed her bag and left. Her hands were shaking. She made it back to her suite before the panic hit. She'd just accused a billionaire of lying about his paralysis on her first day. She'd violated every rule of professional conduct. She'd probably just torpedoed the only job opportunity she'd had in 6 months. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. My office. Now. The office turned out to be in the main house, past the library, through a hallway lined with portraits of men who all had Ethan's jawline and none of his warmth. Claire knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. The man inside wasn't Ethan. He was older, maybe 50. Built like someone who'd spent serious time in a gym and didn't want you to forget it. His suit was expensive but slightly wrinkled, like he'd been wearing it too long. His eyes were the exact color of a frozen lake. Sit, he said. Claire sat. I'm James Vance, head of Mr. Carrington's security. He didn't offer a handshake. You had an interesting first session, but is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? A professional disagreement? You accused him of lying. Vance leaned back in his chair. About his medical condition. On camera. Claire's stomach dropped. The room is monitored? Every room is monitored, for Mr. Carrington's protection. Vance tapped a finger against the desk. So let me ask you something, Miss Whitmore. Are you a physical therapist or are you something else? I'm a physical therapist. Then why are you making accusations instead of providing treatment? Because treatment requires honesty, and your boss is lying. Claire met his eyes. I don't know why, but his body doesn't match his diagnosis, and if I'm going to help him, I need to know what I'm actually dealing with. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Ethan said you had instincts. I didn't believe him. He said, what? He reviewed your file personally, overruled the hiring team's first 3 choices, and insisted on you specifically. Vance's smile faded. Want to know why? Yes? Because you have a history of refusing to accept obvious answers when they don't match the evidence. Your patient complaint wasn't about pain, it was about you insisting his injury was more severe than his family's doctors claimed. You pushed for additional imaging against their wishes. Claire remembered. He had a hairline fracture they'd missed. It would have healed wrong if you hadn't trusted your assessment over their money. Exactly. Vance leaned forward. Ethan needs someone who won't accept the obvious, someone who will look deeper, someone who's too stubborn to quit when things don't make sense. Why? That, Vance said, is not my information to share. But here's what I will tell you. You were right. He is lying. And you're going to keep that information to yourself, continue his treatment exactly as prescribed, and not ask questions you don't want answered. Understood? Claire's mind raced. If he's not actually paralyzed, I didn't say that. You implied it. And if he's faking, I didn't imply anything. I told you you were right to question the diagnosis. What you do with that observation is up to you. Vance stood. But remember your NDA. Remember that you signed a contract binding you to this house for 6 months. And remember that people who ask too many questions in situations they don't understand tend to end up in positions they regret. It wasn't quite a threat. It was too polite to be a threat. But Claire felt it like a hand around her throat anyway. I understand, she said. Good. You're dismissed. She made it to the door before Vance spoke again. Miss Whitmore, one more thing. Claire turned. Ethan requested you specifically because he thought you'd figure it out, but he's not ready for you to confront him about it yet. Vance's expression was unreadable. Give him time. Keep treating him. And when he's ready to tell you the truth, he will. On his terms. And if I'm not willing to wait, then you'll break your contract, forfeit your salary, and find yourself unemployed with a reference that'll make sure you never work in medicine again. Vance shrugged. Your choice. Claire spent the rest of the day in her suite, reviewing medical files that Margaret delivered without comment. Surgical reports, imaging, post-op notes, all of it perfectly consistent with severe spinal trauma and permanent paralysis. All of it expertly falsified, she'd bet her doctorate. The question was why? Why would a billionaire fake paralysis? Why surround himself with medical equipment and therapists and maintain an elaborate charade that had to cost a fortune? She thought about the conversation she'd overheard. Unknowns get people killed. If they find out what? That he wasn't paralyzed? That he was faking? Why would that get anyone killed? Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. Dinner, 6 p.m. Formal dining room, attendance required. Right. Because nothing said, "Welcome to your new job," like mandatory formal dinners with a man who'd kicked you out of his medical suite 6 hours earlier. Claire showered, changed into the only dress she owned that didn't look actively cheap, and made her way to the dining room at exactly 6 p.m. Ethan was already seated at the head of a table designed for 20. He'd changed into a suit, and the effect was devastating. All sharp lines and controlled power, and that face that belonged on currency. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair on his right. Claire sat. A server appeared immediately, pouring wine she didn't want and setting down a first course she was too nervous to eat. "You met Vance," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "And he told you to stop asking questions." "More or less." "Are you going to listen?" Claire picked up her wine glass and took a sip she didn't taste. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're going to tell me the truth eventually, or whether I'm supposed to pretend I don't know you're lying for 6 months straight." She set the glass down. "Because I can do my job without understanding why you're hiding whatever you're hiding. But I can't do it well. And if you brought me here specifically because I notice things other people miss, then I'm assuming you want me to do it well." Ethan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Calculation, maybe. Or respect. "I hired you because you're good at your job," he said. "I hired you because you don't quit when things get difficult. And I hired you because you're desperate enough to stay even when you know something's wrong." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting tonight." He picked up his own wine. "But here's what I'll offer. Stay for 1 month. Do your job. Don't ask questions. At the end of 30 days, if you still want answers, I'll give them to you. And if I want them now, then you're fired. And Vance will ensure you never work in medicine again." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. "Your choice, Miss Whitmore." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders despite his relaxed posture, at the way his hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair just slightly too hard, at the exhaustion buried beneath layers of expensive grooming and perfect control. He was hiding something, something big, and whatever it was eating him alive. 1 month, she said. 1 month, he agreed. They finished dinner in silence. The first week passed in a rhythm that felt like slowly drowning. Claire woke at 5:30 every morning, arrived at Ethan's suite at 6, and spent the next 6 hours working with a patient who gave her nothing. He followed instructions precisely. He completed every exercise without complaint. He answered her questions with technical accuracy and zero emotional content, and his body continued to lie. Every session revealed new contradictions. His core strength was exceptional, the kind of development that required active training, not passive therapy. His muscle memory responded too quickly to prompts, and twice, just twice, she'd caught micro-movements that shouldn't exist in someone with complete lower body paralysis. A twitch in his calf when she'd applied unexpected pressure, a reflexive tension in his hip flexor when she'd moved his leg at an unusual angle. She documented everything in her notes. She said nothing. The rest of her time existed in a strange, suspended state. Meals alone in her suite, except for the mandatory dinners where she and Ethan ate in silence while servers appeared and disappeared like ghosts. Afternoons spent reviewing medical journals she'd downloaded, trying to find some legitimate explanation for what she was seeing. Evenings where she walked the allowed portions of the estate, carefully mapped by Margaret during orientation, and tried not to feel like a prisoner in a very expensive cage. The money appeared in her account on schedule. She paid off her credit cards. She sent money to her cousin. She stared at her bank balance and felt relief and revulsion in equal measure. On day 8, everything changed. Claire was midway through the morning session, working Ethan through a series of resistance exercises, when her phone rang. Not buzzed. Rang, the actual phone call ringtone she'd almost forgotten existed. "Ignore it," Ethan said. She pulled the phone from her pocket, and her blood went cold. The collection agency, the one she'd paid off in full 6 days ago. "I need to take this," she said. "Your contract specifies no personal calls during—" "My contract can wait 30 seconds. She answered before he could argue. "This is Claire." "Miss Whitmore." The voice was male, unfamiliar, and carried an edge that made her skin crawl. "We need to discuss your payment arrangement." "There is no arrangement. I paid the full balance last week." That payment was rejected. That's impossible. I have confirmation. Your confirmation was premature. The transfer was flagged for fraud investigation and reversed. Your account shows a balance of $48,612, plus fees. The room tilted. That's not... I paid... You attempted to pay with funds from an unverified source. The transaction was rejected. We'll need alternate payment within 72 hours, or we'll be forced to pursue collection through other means. What other means? We've already contacted your previous employer. We've also filed notices with the credit bureaus and initiated legal proceedings for asset seizure. A pause. We understand you've recently accepted a new position. Perhaps your current employer would be interested in discussing your financial situation. Threat. Crystal clear threat. Don't, Claire said. Don't contact anyone. I'll handle this. 72 hours, Miss Whitmore. The call ended. Claire stood there, phone in hand, trying to breathe through the panic. Fraud investigation. Transaction reversed. Every dollar she'd sent out was going to bounce back, and she'd owe penalties on top of the original debt. $48,000 she didn't have and couldn't earn fast enough to matter. Problem? Ethan asked. No. She shoved the phone back in her pocket. Just a billing issue. You're lying. With respect, you're the last person who should call someone else a liar. Claire moved back to the resistance bands, hands shaking. Let's continue. Your hands are trembling, your breathing is irregular, and you look like you're about to either vomit or pass out. Ethan's voice was clinically detached. Whatever that call was, it wasn't a billing issue. It's personal, and none of your business. Everything in this house is my business. Claire turned on him, and 6 days of swallowed frustration came out in a rush. Fine. You want to know? That was a collection agency informing me that the debt I paid off with my first paycheck has been rejected because apparently the money you're paying me is being flagged as fraudulent, which is hilarious because you're a billionaire and I'm a physical therapist living in your house under a contract that owns my life for 6 months. So yes, I have a problem. No, it's not your concern, and we're done discussing it. Silence. Ethan looked at her with that unreadable expression she'd started to hate. How much? He asked. Excuse me? How much do you owe? I'm not... How much, Miss Whitmore? 48,000. The words tasted like failure. Give or take. Medical debt? Student loans, credit cards, medical debt from when I didn't have insurance. Claire crossed her arms. It's handled, or it will be. I just need to figure out why the payment bounced. It bounced because my accounting system flags large outgoing transfers from employee accounts as potential fraud. Standard security protocol. Ethan pulled his phone from his pocket and typed something. I'll have it cleared and reprocessed by end of business today. You don't have to... I'm not doing you a favor. I'm correcting an administrative error that's interfering with your ability to do your job. He set the phone aside. The debt will be paid. The collection agency will be notified, and you'll sign an acknowledgement that the payment came from your earned salary, not a personal loan. Claire's throat tightened. Why? Because you're distracted, and I need you focused. Because your debt is apparently significant enough that collection agencies are threatening your employment, and because... He stopped and something flickered across his face. Because I understand what it's like to be trapped by circumstances you didn't create and can't escape. The honesty was startling, and gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Thank you, Claire managed. Don't thank me, just do your job. She did. But for the rest of that session, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed, and neither of them knew quite what it meant. That night, Claire learned what it meant. She was in her suite, reviewing notes, when someone knocked on her door. Not Margaret's brisk double rap. Not the soft tap of a server delivering meals. This was heavy, urgent, wrong. Claire opened the door to find James Vance, and his expression made her stomach drop. Get dressed, he said. We're leaving. Now. What? No questions. Street clothes, nothing identifiable. You have 2 minutes. He wasn't asking. Claire grabbed jeans, a plain shirt, sneakers. Vance waited in the hallway, speaking quietly into a phone, and when she emerged, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a back staircase she hadn't known existed. What's happening? She demanded. Quiet! They descended 3 flights to a basement level that smelled like concrete and motor oil. A black SUV waited with the engine running. Vance shoved her into the back seat and climbed in after her. "Drive," he told the man behind the wheel. The SUV peeled out through a tunnel that opened onto a service road behind the estate. Claire caught a glimpse of the main house through the rear window, every light blazing, figures moving quickly across the grounds. "Is it a fire?" she asked. "No." "Then what?" "Someone tried to kill Ethan tonight." Vance's voice was flat. "They failed. But they got close enough that we're implementing emergency protocols, which means getting everyone non-essential off the property until the threat is contained." Claire's mouth went dry. "Is he?" "He's fine. Angry, but fine." Vance glanced at her. "You're being moved to a secure location until we verify the attempt wasn't connected to you." "Connected to me? I just got here, and you arrived during a very specific window. And your financial situation suddenly escalated in a way that made you vulnerable to coercion." Vance's expression was granite. "Until we confirm you weren't planted here to gather intelligence or provide access, you're a security risk." "That's insane." "That's protocol." The SUV drove for 20 minutes, winding through streets Claire didn't recognize, before pulling into an underground garage beneath a building that looked like every other glass tower in the financial district. Vance led her to an elevator that required a key card and a retinal scan. They emerged on the 40th floor into an apartment that was somehow more intimidating than the estate. All clean lines and expensive minimalism, the kind of space that cost more per square foot than Claire had earned in a year. "You'll stay here tonight," Vance said. "Don't leave, don't make calls, don't contact anyone. Someone will be stationed outside your door." "For how long?" "Until Ethan says otherwise." He moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're involved. But my opinion doesn't matter. His does." He left. The lock clicked with an electronic finality. Claire stood in the middle of the apartment, in clothes she'd thrown on in panic, and tried to process what had just happened. Someone had tried to kill Ethan. Someone had gotten close enough to make Vance implement emergency protocols. And now she was locked in a secure location while they decided if she was a threat. She thought about Ethan's body, the way it responded with too much strength and too much control. About the conversation she'd overheard her first night. Unknowns get people killed. About the elaborate charade he was maintaining, the lie he was living every single day. What if his paralysis wasn't just a lie? What if it was a strategy? The thought was absurd. And yet, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Answer your door." Claire's heart kicked. She moved to the door, checked the peephole, saw nothing. Opened it slowly. Ethan sat in the hallway in his wheelchair, alone. "Invite me in," he said, "before security realizes I left the estate." Claire stepped aside. He rolled past her into the apartment, and she closed the door and locked it. "You're supposed to be secured in a safe room while Vance's team sweeps the property." "I know." Ethan moved to the windows overlooking the city. "I left. I needed to talk to you. Vance said someone tried to kill you. Vance says that every time anything unusual happens. Tonight, someone bypassed the perimeter security and got as far as the East Wing before being intercepted." He turned to look at her. "They were heading toward your suite." Claire's blood went cold. "Toward me?" "Toward you, or toward the person who might have information about me." His eyes were black in the dim light. "Tell me the truth. Did anyone contact you before you took this job? Offer you money, ask you questions, suggest you report back about my condition?" "No, I saw a job posting. I applied. I was hired." "And your debt? The sudden payment rejection?" "I told you. Collection agency, standard harassment." Claire crossed her arms. "Are you actually asking if I'm working for whoever just tried to kill you?" "I'm asking if you were targeted as a potential asset. There's a difference." "The answer is no either way." Claire's voice came out sharper than intended. "I took this job because I needed money, and you were paying more than anyone else. That's it. No conspiracy, no hidden agenda, just desperation and your apparently very accurate hiring team." Ethan studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the cold corporate smile she'd seen at dinner, something real. "I believe you," he said. "Then why are you here?" Because Vance is going to want to interrogate you tomorrow. He's going to ask invasive questions, dig into your past, and generally make you feel like a criminal. Ethan's hands gripped the wheelchair armrests, and I wanted to give you the option to walk away before that happens. Claire blinked. Walk away? Your contract has a termination clause. Medical leave, personal emergency, hostile work environment, any of those would qualify. I'll authorize it. You'll get a severance package that covers your debt, and you can leave without any professional consequences. You're offering to let me quit. I'm offering to let you escape. His voice was quiet. This situation is dangerous. It's going to get worse. And you didn't sign up for any of it. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion he was trying to hide, at the tension in his shoulders despite the casual posture, at the way he was watching her like her answer actually mattered. Why did someone try to kill you? She asked. That's complicated. Try me. I can't. Not yet. Because you don't trust me or because the truth is classified under 17 layers of security protocol? Both. Ethan's mouth quirked. But mostly the second one. Claire walked to the window and stared out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, working normal jobs, dealing with normal problems that didn't involve assassination attempts and fake paralysis and billionaires who lied for reasons they refused to explain. She could leave, take the money, clear her debt, start over somewhere safe and boring and far away from whatever this was. Instead, she turned back to Ethan and said, I'm staying. Why? Because you hired me to do a job and I don't quit. She moved closer. And because whatever you're hiding, whatever game you're playing, it's eating you alive. I can see it, and I'm good at my job, which means I can help. If you let me. Help how? I don't know yet, but I'm not leaving to find out. Claire crossed her arms. So here's the deal. I stay. I do my job. And when you're ready to tell me the truth, you will. On your terms. Until then, I'll keep my mouth shut and my observations to myself. Ethan looked at her like he was trying to solve an equation that didn't have a clear answer. You're either very brave or very stupid. I'm very broke and very stubborn. There's a difference. This time when he smiled, it reached his eyes. Fair enough. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Claire? It was the first time he'd used her first name. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not running. He opened the door. Most people would have. He left before she could respond. Claire stood there in the expensive empty apartment and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The answer came the next morning when Vance appeared at 7 a.m. with coffee and an expression that suggested he hadn't slept. Ethan told me you're staying, he said. I am. Then we need to talk about what that means. Vance set the coffee on the counter. The person who breached security last night was a professional. Former military, specialized training, very expensive. They got past systems that are supposed to be impenetrable, and they were specifically targeting information about Ethan's medical condition. Why? Because if certain people knew the truth about his condition, they'd move against him immediately, and a lot of people would die. Vance's voice was matter-of-fact. Your presence in the house makes you both a potential asset and a potential liability. Anyone looking for leverage would see you as an easy target, meaning I'm in danger, meaning you are under protection, starting now. Vance pulled out a phone, different from his usual one, all black and unmarked. This is yours, encrypted, untraceable, direct line to me and Ethan. Keep it on you at all times. If anything feels wrong, you call. If anyone approaches you outside the estate, you call. If you so much as get a bad feeling, you call. Understand? Claire took the phone. Is this really necessary? Last night, someone got within 50 feet of your bedroom. So yes, it's necessary. Vance moved toward the door. You're being moved back to the estate this afternoon. Until then, stay here. Read this. He handed her a tablet and left. Claire looked at the screen. It was filled with documents, news articles, financial reports, legal filings, all of them related to Carrington Industries and a hostile takeover attempt that had apparently been brewing for the past year. She started reading. By the time Vance returned 6 hours later, Claire understood. Not everything. There were gaps in the timeline, redacted sections in the legal documents, Names that appeared and disappeared without explanation, but enough to see the shape of what Ethan was fighting. Someone wanted his company. Multiple someones, actually, all circling like sharks. And 6 months ago, right when Ethan's accident occurred, the takeover attempts had suddenly stalled. Frozen in legal limbo while Ethan recovered from injuries that supposedly left him unable to run his empire. Injuries that Claire knew were at least partially fabricated. "You're starting to see it," Vance said from the doorway. Claire set down the tablet. "He's buying time. He's buying a lot of things. Time is just one of them. And the paralysis is making his enemies complacent. They think he's weak. They think they can wait him out." Vance's smile was sharp. "They're wrong. But if they find out, they'll move immediately, strike before he can solidify his defenses. And a lot of loyal people who've stood by him will end up as collateral damage." Vance's expression hardened. "That's why your observations stay private. That's why you can't tell anyone what you suspect. And that's why last night's breach was so dangerous." Claire's mind raced. "What did they get?" "Nothing. We intercepted them before they reached your suite, but they got close enough that we have to assume they know you're observant, medically trained, and potentially aware that something doesn't add up. So I'm a liability. You're a witness to something that can't be witnessed yet, which makes you valuable and vulnerable." Vance checked his watch. "We're leaving in 10 minutes, back to the estate. Different route, different security, different protocols. From now on, you don't go anywhere without clearance. Understood?" "Understood." The drive back took an hour through roads that twisted and doubled back until Claire lost all sense of direction. When they finally pulled through the estate gates, the sun was setting, and the house looked different. More guards, more cameras, more locked doors. Ethan was waiting in his suite when she arrived for what should have been her afternoon session, but had become an evening one. "You read the files," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "And?" "And I understand why you're lying. I don't understand how you're planning to maintain it for 6 more months, but I understand the why. The how is your job." Ethan gestured to the treatment table. "If I'm going to convince the board, the investors, and the vultures circling my company that I'm incapacitated, I need to look incapacitated, which means physical therapy that appears to be failing despite everyone's best efforts." Claire stared at him. "You want me to fake your treatment. I want you to provide real treatment that maintains my actual condition while creating the appearance of deterioration." His eyes were steady. "Can you do that?" It was unethical, possibly illegal, definitely against every professional standard she'd ever been taught. "Yes," Claire said. "I can do that." "Good." He transferred to the table. "Then let's start." They worked in silence for an hour, Claire's hands moving through familiar patterns while her mind spun through the implications of what she'd just agreed to. She was no longer just a physical therapist. She was part of an elaborate deception designed to protect a company worth billions and the people who depended on it. The weight should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something else. Purpose. Direction. The sense that for the first time in months, she was doing something that mattered beyond just surviving. "You're different," Ethan said suddenly. Claire paused mid-stretch. "Different how?" "You stopped being afraid, not of me, of the situation." He watched her with that unreadable expression. "Most people would be running. You're leaning in. Most people don't have $48,000 in debt and a termination clause that would destroy their career." Claire resumed the stretch. "I'm practical, not brave." "You're both." His voice was quiet. "And you're exactly what I needed." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meanings Claire didn't want to examine too closely. She finished the session in silence, documented everything with clinical precision, and left before either of them could say something they'd regret. Back in her suite, she found a package on the coffee table. Inside was a new laptop, a keycard with expanded estate access, and a handwritten note. "You're no longer just an employee. Welcome to the game. E." Claire looked at the note for a long time. Then she picked up the encrypted phone Vance had given her and typed a message. "I'm in. Whatever this is, I'm in." The response came immediately. "I know. That's why I hired you." She fell asleep that night, wondering what exactly she'd just committed to. The answer would come sooner than she expected, and it would change everything. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Thursday, and Ethan spent the previous night preparing in ways that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or projected earnings. Claire watched from the doorway of his suite as he practiced. Slumped posture, trembling hands that looked convincing until you knew they were controlled tremors, perfectly timed. A weakness in his voice that disappeared the moment he stopped performing. "You're staring," he said without looking at her. "I'm observing. There's a difference." Claire moved into the room. "You missed a detail. Your left shoulder drops when you're actually tired. When you're faking it, you drop the right one." Ethan straightened immediately, rolling both shoulders back. "How long have you known that?" "Week 2. You do it during evening sessions when you think I'm focused on your legs." She picked up his medical chart, the falsified one meant for outside eyes. "If you want them to believe you're deteriorating, you need to be consistent. Exhaustion affects both sides equally unless there's a specific neurological reason." "There isn't." "Then fix it." Claire set the chart down. The board members aren't doctors, but they're not stupid either. If something feels off, they'll question it. Ethan studied her with an intensity that still made her skin prickle even after 3 weeks of daily sessions. "You're getting better at this." "At what?" "Helping you lie?" "At strategic thinking." He shifted in the wheelchair, and this time both shoulders dropped in perfect symmetry. Most people compartmentalize. They do their job and ignore the larger context. You're connecting pieces. That's just pattern recognition. It's what physical therapists do. We see how everything connects. Claire moved closer, professional distance dissolving into something else entirely. "But you're right, I'm getting better at it. Not sure if that's a good thing." "It's necessary." "Necessary and good aren't the same." The observation hung between them. Ethan's expression shifted, something unguarded flickering across his face before disappearing behind the mask he wore like armor. "The meeting starts at 10, he said. "I'll need you there." Claire's stomach dropped. "In the boardroom?" "As my physical therapist. You'll provide an update on my condition, answer questions about prognosis, and generally reinforce the narrative that I'm not recovering as expected." He pulled out a folder and handed it to her. "Talking points. Memorize them." She opened the folder. Inside were pages of medical terminology, carefully crafted phrases that sounded clinical while saying absolutely nothing concrete. Muscle atrophy consistent with extended immobility. Neurological response below baseline expectations. Prognosis guarded pending further evaluation. "This is 3 hours of work," Claire said. "You have 9 hours. I suggest you start now." She did. Back in her suite, she spread the documents across the coffee table and began the process of turning lies into believable medical testimony. The talking points were brilliant in their vagueness, everything technically true if you interpreted the data a certain way, nothing definitively false enough to constitute malpractice. Around 2 a.m., her encrypted phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Still awake?" "Unfortunately, your talking points read like a legal brief had a baby with a medical journal. That's the idea. Can you sell it?" Claire looked at the pages covered in her notes. "Yes, but I'm adding a section on recommended treatment modifications. If they think you're deteriorating, they'll expect me to suggest changes." "Smart. Send me the draft." She did. He responded 20 minutes later with edits that sharpened her language and added technical details she'd missed. They went back and forth until 4 a.m., refining the presentation until it could withstand scrutiny from anyone short of a neurologist. "Get some sleep," Ethan finally sent. "You'll need to look exhausted tomorrow. Selling the idea that I'm a difficult patient. I won't have to fake that part." "Good. Neither will I." Claire fell asleep on the couch, still dressed. The folder clutched against her chest like a shield. Margaret woke her at 7 with coffee and a garment bag. "Mr. Carrington sent this. He thought your current wardrobe might not be appropriate for the boardroom." Inside the bag was a suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, expensive enough to make Claire's hand shake slightly as she lifted it out. A note was pinned to the jacket. "Armor for battle. Don't refuse it." She showered, dressed, stared at herself in the mirror. The suit fit like it had been made for her, which it probably had been. She looked professional, competent, like someone who belonged in a boardroom making presentations to people who controlled billions. The reflection was a stranger. At 9:30, Vance appeared at her door. Ready? No. Good. People who think they're ready usually aren't. He gestured for her to follow. A few things you need to know. The board consists of 12 members. 8 are loyal to Ethan. 3 are actively working against him. 1 is undecided and holds the swing vote. Which 3? Harold Chen, Vanessa Torres, Marcus Webb. They'll ask pointed questions designed to undermine confidence in Ethan's recovery. Your job is to answer honestly without revealing anything useful. That's a contradiction. That's politics. Vance led her through hallways she hadn't been allowed to access before. Chen will focus on timeline. Torres will question your qualifications. Webb will try to get you to commit to a definitive prognosis. Don't let any of them corner you. They reached a set of mahogany doors. Through them, Claire could hear voices. Low, serious, the kind of conversation that happened when powerful people discussed other people's futures. One more thing, Vance said quietly. Ethan needs this to work. Not just for the company, for the 200,000 people employed by Carrington Industries worldwide. If the takeover succeeds, those jobs disappear. The hostile investors will gut the company for parts and walk away rich. The weight of that landed on Claire's shoulders like a physical thing. No pressure. Massive pressure. But Ethan wouldn't have brought you if he didn't think you could handle it. Vance opened the doors. Show them what you're made of. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 20, walls lined with portraits of men who'd built empires and crushed anyone who got in their way. 12 people sat around the table, all turning to look as Claire entered. Ethan was already positioned at the head of the table in his wheelchair, looking every inch the wounded king. He didn't acknowledge her entrance. None of the warmth from their late-night text exchange showed on his face. "Miss Whitmore," he said formally, "thank you for joining us." Claire moved to the presentation area at the front of the room, her heels clicking against marble floors. Someone had already set up her materials, tablet connected to the room's display system, medical charts arranged on a side table, a pitcher of water she knew she wouldn't touch because her hands might shake. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan continued, "Claire Whitmore has been serving as my primary physical therapist for the past 3 weeks. I've asked her to provide an update on my condition and prognosis." A woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and eyes like a predator leaned forward. Vanessa Torres, Claire guessed. "Miss Whitmore, would you mind sharing your credentials? I want to ensure we're receiving expert testimony." First attack. Claire had expected this. "Of course. I have a doctorate in physical therapy from Columbia University, where I specialized in neurological rehabilitation and spinal cord injury recovery. I worked at Mount Sinai's neurology department for 3 years before accepting this position." She met Torres's gaze steadily. "My qualifications were thoroughly vetted before Mr. Carrington's team hired me." "And yet you left Mount Sinai under somewhat controversial circumstances." I left Mount Sinai after a patient with significant family wealth attempted to have me terminated for providing accurate medical assessment that contradicted his family's preferred narrative. The hospital reviewed my treatment and found it medically sound. I chose to leave rather than work in an environment where medicine was secondary to politics. Someone snorted. One of Ethan's loyalists, probably. Torres's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "I see. And your assessment of Mr. Carrington's condition?" Claire pulled up the first slide, imaging scans that showed exactly what they were supposed to show. "Mr. Carrington sustained significant spinal trauma 6 months ago during what was officially reported as a vehicular accident. The injuries resulted in fractures at the T11 and T12 vertebrae with associated nerve damage." She walked them through the medical history, using the language she and Ethan had crafted. Technical enough to sound authoritative, vague enough to avoid concrete claims. The board members listened with varying degrees of attention. Harold Chen, an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient expression of someone who'd sat through thousands of these presentations, raised his hand. "Miss Whitmore, in your professional opinion, what is the timeline for Mr. Carrington's recovery?" Timeline. Vance had warned her. Recovery timelines for spinal cord injuries are highly variable and depend on numerous factors: extent of initial damage, patient compliance with therapy, individual healing rates, and potential complications. That's not an answer. Because there isn't a definitive answer, Some patients show significant improvement within months, others require years, and some, Claire paused deliberately, experience permanent deficits that don't improve regardless of intervention. Which category does Mr. Carrington fall into? Claire glanced at Ethan. He sat perfectly still, face expressionless, waiting to see if she could navigate this without breaking. Based on his current progress, I would characterize Mr. Carrington's recovery as slower than optimal. We've seen some improvement in upper body strength and core stability, which is positive. However, lower body response has been minimal. She pulled up a chart showing fabricated progress metrics. These numbers represent the standard benchmarks for recovery at the 3-month mark. As you can see, Mr. Carrington is below the median across most categories. How far below? Significantly. Marcus Webb spoke for the first time. He was younger than the others, early 40s maybe, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from never being told no. Defined significantly. I'd rather not quantify it numerically. The metrics can be misleading without proper context. Try. Claire felt the room's attention sharpen. This was the moment. Commit to a number, and they could hold her to it. Refuse, and they'd question her competence. Mr. Carrington is currently performing at approximately 35 to 40% of the expected recovery benchmarks for his injury type and timeline. She let that sink in. However, those benchmarks assume optimal conditions, young patients, no complications, full-time dedicated therapy. Mr. Carrington is managing a global company while recovering from catastrophic trauma. The cognitive load alone impacts healing. So, you're saying the job is preventing his recovery? Webb leaned back, satisfied. I'm saying recovery is multifaceted, and isolating any single factor is reductive. But if he stepped back from the company, I'm a physical therapist, Mr. Webb, not a career counselor. My expertise is in rehabilitation, not corporate strategy. Someone laughed. Ethan's face remained neutral, but Claire saw his fingers tighten slightly on the wheelchair armrest. Approval, maybe. Or warning. Torres jumped back in. Miss Whitmore, you mentioned permanent deficits. In your professional opinion, is it possible that Mr. Carrington will not recover full mobility? This was it. The question everything hinged on. Claire looked directly at Torres. Yes, it's possible. The room went very still. It's also possible he'll make a complete recovery, or partial recovery, or plateau at his current level for years before showing improvement. Claire kept her voice clinical. Spinal cord injuries are notoriously unpredictable. I can tell you what his current status is. I cannot tell you what it will be in 6 months, or a year, or 5 years. Anyone who claims they can is either lying or incompetent. That's not acceptable, Chen said. This board needs concrete information to make informed decisions about the company's leadership. Then you're asking the wrong questions to the wrong person. Claire met his eyes. I can tell you that Mr. Carrington is physically capable of making decisions, communicating clearly, and managing cognitive tasks at a high level. His injury affects his mobility, not his mind. If you're questioning his ability to run this company, that's a conversation about disability discrimination, not medical fitness. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Chen's face flushed. Torres looked like she wanted to say something cutting, but couldn't find the angle. Webb was staring at Claire like she'd just pulled a gun. Ethan spoke into the silence. I think Miss Whitmore has made her position clear. Does anyone have additional medical questions, or can we move on to the financial report? No one spoke. Excellent, Claire. Thank you for your time. Please send your full written assessment to Margaret by end of business today. Dismissed. Claire gathered her materials with hands that only shook slightly and walked out of the boardroom with her spine straight and her heart hammering. She made it to the nearest bathroom before her legs gave out. 20 minutes later, Vance found her sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, still in the expensive suit, trying to remember how to breathe normally. You just made 3 very powerful people look incompetent in front of their peers, he said conversationally. Ethan's very pleased. I think I'm going to throw up. Natural response. First boardroom confrontation is always rough. Vance offered her a hand. Come on. Ethan wants to see you. I can't. I need... Now, Claire. She let him pull her to her feet. They went back through the halls to Ethan's private office. Not the medical suite, but his actual workspace. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk that probably cost more than a car, windows overlooking the estate's gardens. Ethan was standing, just standing, casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He was looking out the window, hands in his pockets, and when he turned at their entrance, his expression was completely unguarded. "You were perfect," he said. Claire stared. "You're standing." "Vance, give us a minute." Vance left without comment. The door closed. "You're standing," Claire repeated, because her brain had apparently stopped processing anything else. "I do that sometimes, when I'm alone, or with people I trust." Ethan moved toward her and his gait was completely normal. No limp, no weakness, nothing that suggested 6 months of paralysis. "You handled them better than I expected. I told them you might never recover. You told them what they needed to hear while giving them nothing they could use." Torres was looking for a definitive timeline so they could argue for forced medical leave. Chen wanted evidence of cognitive decline. Webb just wanted you to crack. Ethan stopped a few feet away. "You gave them medical uncertainty and turned their questions into potential discrimination issues. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. That too." His smile was real this time. "But you didn't break. And now they know you can't be intimidated or manipulated into providing the answers they want." Claire's mind was still catching up. "How long have you been able to walk?" "Since the beginning. The injury was real. I had surgery, I had nerve damage, but it healed faster and more completely than the official reports suggest." He moved back to the window. "The paralysis is theater. Very expensive, very elaborate theater, designed to make my enemies complacent. And me? What am I? You're the detail that makes the theater believable. A qualified medical professional providing regular assessments, documenting my lack of progress, testifying to the board about my condition." Ethan looked back at her. "You're the reason they can't question the narrative. I'm a prop. You're a shield. There's a difference." Claire wanted to be angry. She should be angry. Used, manipulated, turned into a tool in some corporate war she barely understood. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Clarity, purpose. The sense that she was finally doing something that mattered. "What happens when they figure it out?" she asked. "They won't. Not until I want them to. And when will that be? When I've secured enough votes to remove the board members working against me. When I've identified everyone involved in the takeover attempt. And when I've ensured that revealing the truth will destroy them instead of me." He turned fully to face her. 3 more months. Maybe 4. Can you maintain this for 3 more months? Claire thought about the board meeting, about Torres's predatory questions and Chen's dismissive attitude and Webb's smooth attempts at manipulation, about standing in front of 12 powerful people and lying with clinical precision. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." "Good." Ethan's expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. "Because you're not just maintaining a lie anymore. You're actively building a case. Every assessment you document, every session you record, every piece of medical evidence you create, it all becomes part of the official record. When this is over, that record will prove I was unfit to lead during the exact period when the takeover was planned, which means every decision made by the hostile board members becomes legally questionable. You're going to sue them. I'm going to destroy them. Legally, financially, professionally." He moved closer, and Claire caught the scent of expensive cologne and something else. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the particular stress that came from fighting a war on multiple fronts. "But I need ammunition, and you're creating it. By documenting your fake deterioration. By providing legitimate medical assessments that happen to reflect the condition I'm presenting rather than my actual status." Ethan stopped directly in front of her. "It's not fraud if the observations are accurate to what's being observed. You're recording what you see. Not my fault if what you see is carefully constructed." The logic was twisted enough to make Claire's head hurt. That's a very thin legal line. It's the only line we have. They stood there in silence, close enough that Claire could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested too many sleepless nights, the tension in his jaw that never fully relaxed. He looked tired. Actually tired. Not performing tired. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could have hired someone more experienced, someone with better credentials, fewer complications." "I told you Your instincts, your pattern recognition. Ethan's voice dropped. And because when that patient's family tried to force you out for telling the truth, you didn't back down. You let them destroy your career rather than falsify your assessment. That kind of integrity is rare. So you hired me to help you lie. I hired you to help me survive. There's a difference. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to find the flaw in his logic that would let her walk away with her conscience intact. Instead, she heard herself say, "What happened to the person who tried to kill you? The one who got into the East Wing?" Ethan's expression went cold. "Vance handled it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." He turned away. "The board will want your written assessment by end of day. Make sure it aligns with your testimony." Dismissed again. Claire should have left, should have gone back to her suite and written the report and maintained the professional distance that was rapidly dissolving into something far more dangerous. Instead, she said, "Ethan." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "When this is over, when you've won and the board is gone, and you don't need the wheelchair anymore, what happens to me? What do you want to happen?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them was ready to address. "I want to know I helped," Claire said finally. "I want to know that all of this, the lying, the manipulation, the risk, I want to know it mattered." Ethan turned then, and his expression was raw in a way she'd never seen. "It matters. You matter. More than you know." He left before she could respond. Claire stood alone in his office, surrounded by books and expensive furniture and the ghost of his presence, and tried to figure out when exactly she'd stopped being just an employee and become something else entirely. The answer scared her more than the assassination attempt had. She spent the rest of the day writing the report, each word carefully calibrated to support the narrative without crossing into outright fabrication. Muscle response minimal. Range of motion limited. Patient compliance excellent despite lack of measurable progress. Prognosis guarded pending ongoing evaluation. She sent it to Margaret at 5 p.m. and collapsed on her bed, still wearing the suit Ethan had given her. Her encrypted phone buzzed an hour later. A message from Ethan. "The board accepted your assessment. Chen and Torres are calling for an emergency vote on temporary leadership transfer." Claire's stomach dropped. "When?" 2 weeks. Which means we have 2 weeks to ensure the swing vote lands on our side. How do we do that? We convince them I'm fighting, that I'm not giving up, not accepting defeat, still the man who built this company. A pause. Then, "Think you can handle a few more board meetings?" Claire looked at the ceiling and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Then she typed, "How many?" "As many as it takes." "Then yes, I can handle it." "Good, because tomorrow we escalate." The message that followed was a detailed plan that made the board meeting look tame by comparison. Claire read it twice, her heart rate climbing with each paragraph. This wasn't just maintaining a lie anymore. This was warfare. And she'd just agreed to be Ethan's weapon. She fell asleep that night with the suit still on and the encrypted phone clutched in her hand, dreaming of boardrooms and battles she wasn't qualified to fight but couldn't walk away from. The escalation Ethan had promised came at 6 a.m. the next morning when Claire arrived at his suite to find it empty except for Vance, who was standing near the window with his phone pressed to his ear and an expression that made her blood run cold. He ended the call and turned to her. "Change of plans. We're going to the hospital." "What happened?" Ethan collapsed during his morning routine. Margaret found him unresponsive 20 minutes ago. Vance was already moving toward the door. "Ambulance is en route. You're riding with him." Claire's medical training kicked in before her brain could catch up. "Unresponsive how? Loss of consciousness? Seizure? Cardiac? I don't know. I wasn't there." Vance grabbed her arm and pulled her into the hallway. "What I do know is that 3 board members will somehow learn about this within the hour, and they'll want independent medical verification of his condition, which means you need to be there when he's admitted." The pieces clicked into place. "This is staged. This is necessary." They reached the main entrance just as the ambulance pulled up, lights flashing but no sirens. "Play along, act concerned, and for the love of everything, don't let anyone see you doubting the performance." The paramedics rushed past them with a gurney. Claire followed them up to Ethan's private quarters, a section of the house she'd never been allowed to access. They found him on the floor of his bedroom, Margaret kneeling beside him, and the scene was disturbingly convincing. Ethan's skin was pale, his breathing shallow, his eyes closed. The paramedics moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, asking Margaret questions she answered with the right mix of fear and clinical detail. He was transferring from the bed to his chair. He said he felt dizzy, then he just collapsed. I couldn't wake him up. Claire knelt beside the gurney as they lifted him. His hand was cold when she touched it, and for a moment, just a moment, she wondered if this was actually real, if something had gone catastrophically wrong and the performance had become reality. Then his fingers twitched against hers in a pattern she recognized. 3 short pulses. The signal they'd established during therapy sessions when he needed her to follow his lead without question. Relief and fury hit her in equal measure. She squeezed back once, message received, and stepped aside as they loaded him into the ambulance. The ride to the hospital took 15 minutes. Claire sat beside Ethan while the paramedic monitored his vitals and radioed ahead to the ER. His blood pressure was low. His heart rate was elevated. Everything suggested a genuine medical emergency. Everything was a lie. At the hospital, they were met by a team that whisked Ethan away to a private room. Claire tried to follow, but was stopped by a nurse with kind eyes and a firm hand. Family only beyond this point. I'm his physical therapist. I need to provide medical history. The doctors will get what they need from his records. You can wait in the consultation room. Claire found herself deposited in a small room with uncomfortable chairs and motivational posters about staying positive. She pulled out her encrypted phone and typed, "What the hell is happening?" Vance responded immediately, "Exactly what needs to happen. Wait for the doctor." She waited. 20 minutes became 40, became an hour. Other people came and went, families getting news, patients being discharged, the steady rhythm of a hospital going through its daily chaos. Finally, a doctor appeared. Late 50s, expensive watch, the kind of confident posture that suggested private practice and 7-figure clients. "Miss Whitmore, I'm Dr. Richard Ashford. I understand you're Mr. Carrington's physical therapist." "Yes, is he stable? We're running tests, but initial assessment suggests a vasovagal response. Essentially, his blood pressure dropped suddenly, causing him to lose consciousness." Ashford sat down across from her. "Given his recent medical history, we're being cautious. I'd like to keep him for observation for 24 hours. Claire forced herself to look worried rather than skeptical. "A vasovagal response? That's unusual for someone his age without an underlying cardiac condition. Not unusual for someone under significant stress who's managing chronic pain and extensive physical therapy." Ashford's expression was carefully neutral. "I understand Mr. Carrington has been pushing himself quite hard in his rehabilitation efforts." "He has. Sometimes beyond what I'd recommend." The lie came easily now. Too easily. "I've documented concerns about overexertion in my treatment notes. I'd like to review those notes, and I'll need a full update on his current physical therapy regimen." Ashford pulled out a tablet. "The board has requested that I conduct an independent evaluation of his overall fitness. Given this morning's incident, I think that's warranted." There it was, the real purpose of this theater. An independent doctor providing objective assessment that would either support or contradict everything Claire had been documenting. "Of course," Claire said. "I can send you all my reports and session notes. When would you like to conduct the evaluation?" "Once he's cleared from observation, probably tomorrow afternoon." Ashford stood. "I assume you'll want to see him? He's asking for you." Claire followed him through corridors that smelled like antiseptic and resignation to a private room that probably cost more per night than most people's mortgages. Ethan was propped up in bed, connected to monitors that beeped in steady rhythm, looking appropriately weak and disoriented. "I'll give you a few minutes," Ashford said, and closed the door behind him. The moment the latch clicked, Ethan's expression cleared. "Check for cameras." Claire did a quick sweep. "We're clear." "What the hell was that?" "Insurance. Ashford is connected to Torres. They went to medical school together. She arranged for him to be on call today, conveniently available when I had my little collapse." Ethan pulled the IV line slightly. "He's going to examine me, find exactly what we need him to find, and report back to the board that I'm deteriorating faster than expected. And if he finds something that contradicts my assessments, he won't. Because you're going to be in the room during his evaluation, and you're going to guide him toward the conclusions that support our narrative. Ethan's smile was sharp. Think of it as collaborative medicine. That's not how medicine works. It is when billions of dollars are at stake. He reached for her hand, and the touch sent electricity up her arm. I need you to trust me. Can you do that? Claire looked at him, really looked at him. At the IV, he didn't need, and the monitors recording vitals that were only abnormal because he was controlling them to be. At the performance he was giving even in a hospital bed with no audience except her. I trusted you when I signed the contract, she said quietly. I trusted you when I lied to the board. I'm trusting you now. But Ethan, she squeezed his hand. When this is over, you're going to tell me everything. No more carefully edited truths, everything. When this is over, he promised, there won't be anything left to hide. A knock at the door made them spring apart. A nurse entered with medication Claire knew Ethan wouldn't actually take. She watched him perform gratitude and weakness, watched the nurse buy it completely, and felt something twist in her chest that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite fear. She stayed at the hospital for 6 hours, reviewing notes and preparing for tomorrow's evaluation with Ashford. Vance appeared around 3 p.m. with food and an update. Torres called an emergency board meeting for next week. She's using this incident as evidence that Ethan's condition is critical and leadership needs to be transferred immediately. Can she do that? With the right votes, yes, which is why Ashford's evaluation tomorrow is crucial. Vance handed her a coffee that was somehow exactly how she liked it. He needs to find decline, not catastrophic collapse that would trigger immediate removal, but steady deterioration that suggests Ethan's fighting a losing battle. You want me to help a doctor diagnose my patient with a condition he doesn't have. I want you to contextualize observations in a way that supports our position. There's a difference. Not much of one. Enough of one to keep you out of jail. Vance's expression was serious. Claire, I know this is hard. I know it goes against your training and your ethics, but 200,000 jobs are riding on this. And if Torres succeeds, most of those people will be unemployed within 6 months. Claire thought about the collection agency that had threatened to destroy her life over $48,000, about the hospital that had let her go rather than defend her against wealthy donors, about every system that had failed her and everyone else who didn't have money or power to fight back. What do you need me to do? She asked. Vance's smile was grim. Tomorrow, when Ashford examines Ethan, you're going to notice things. Decreased grip strength on the right side, asymmetric reflex response, mild cognitive fog during complex questions. Nothing dramatic, just subtle signs of decline that a good doctor would catch. And if Ashford doesn't catch them, you'll point them out professionally, as a concerned therapist who's been working with the patient daily and notices patterns others might miss. Claire finished her coffee and stood. I need to see Ethan's chart. The real one, not the falsified version. If I'm going to sell this, I need to know exactly what we're working with. That's classified. Then declassify it. Because if I go into that evaluation blind and Ashford asks me a technical question I can't answer, this whole thing falls apart. Vance studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and typed something. Margaret will have it waiting in your suite when you get back to the estate. Memorize it tonight. Burn it tomorrow. Literally? Literally. Claire went back to the estate and found the file exactly where Vance had promised. It was thicker than she'd expected. Surgical notes, imaging, post-op complications that had never made it into the official narrative. She read it 3 times, committing every detail to memory. The truth was simpler than the lie. Ethan had been injured in what the file vaguely described as an incident requiring immediate medical intervention. He'd had surgery. He'd healed. Not perfectly. There was nerve damage, chronic pain, some loss of sensation, but nothing that would prevent him from walking or running his company. The paralysis had been his choice, a strategic decision made during recovery when he'd realized his enemies thought he was weaker than he was. And he'd built an entire infrastructure around that lie, hiring doctors who'd falsify records and therapists who'd maintain the charade. Until Claire, who was supposed to be observant enough to notice the truth but desperate enough not to expose it. She burned the file in her fireplace at 3 a.m. and tried not to think about how many laws she was breaking or how many ethical lines she'd crossed. Instead, she focused on tomorrow's evaluation and the performance she'd have to give to sell it. Sleep came in fragments. She woke at 5, showered, dressed in the professional clothes that had become her armor, and returned to the hospital. Ashford arrived at 9 a.m. with an entourage, 2 residents, a nurse practitioner, and an air of absolute authority. Claire met them in Ethan's room, where he was already positioned in the wheelchair, looking exhausted and determined in equal measure. "Miss Whitmore?" Ashford nodded politely. "Thank you for joining us. I'd like to conduct a comprehensive neurological and physical assessment. Your input as the primary therapist would be valuable." "Of course." Claire pulled out her tablet with session notes. "Where would you like to start?" They started with cognitive function. Ashford asked Ethan questions designed to test memory, processing speed, executive function. Ethan answered most correctly but stumbled on a few complex calculations, adding just enough hesitation to suggest fatigue without looking obviously impaired. Claire documented everything and added her observations. "I've noticed increased cognitive fatigue during afternoon sessions. Morning assessments show better performance." "Consistent with neurological stress," Ashford murmured, making notes. Next came the physical examination: reflexes, muscle tone, sensation testing. Ethan's performance was masterful, subtle variations in response that could be interpreted as decline if you were looking for it. Claire watched Ashford's face as he worked. He was good, thorough, and he was finding exactly what Torres had sent him to find. "Grip strength," Ashford said, handing Ethan a dynamometer. Ethan squeezed with his right hand. The reading was lower than it should be. He switched to his left, even lower. "That's decreased from your baseline," Claire said, checking her notes. 3 weeks ago, you were showing better strength bilaterally." "How much better?" Ashford asked. "Roughly 15% stronger on the right, 20 on the left." The numbers were invented, but her delivery was confident. "I've been monitoring it because asymmetric decline can indicate progressing neurological compromise." Ashford's expression sharpened. "Have you documented this in your reports?" "Yes, though I've tried to frame it optimistically for the patient's morale." She glanced at Ethan with what she hoped looked like professional concern. "Mr. Carrington has been under significant stress. I didn't want to add to it by emphasizing negative trends." "I appreciate your discretion, Miss Whitmore, but in cases like this, accurate reporting is more important than morale." Ashford turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carrington, I'm going to be frank with you. Based on this examination and Miss Whitmore's observations, I'm concerned about the trajectory of your recovery. The decline we're seeing suggests your condition may be progressing rather than improving." Ethan's face did something complicated. Fear and denial and anger, all carefully calibrated. Progressing toward what? "I can't say definitively without more extensive testing, but the pattern suggests increasing neurological compromise. It's possible the initial injury caused more damage than we realized, or that complications have developed." "What kind of complications?" "Scar tissue, inflammation, secondary degeneration." Ashford's voice was gentle, clinical. "I'd recommend a full workup, updated imaging, nerve conduction studies, possibly a surgical consult to evaluate whether intervention might prevent further decline." Claire watched Ethan process this fictional diagnosis with an expression that looked genuinely devastated. She felt sick. "How long?" Ethan asked quietly. "If this continues, if it gets worse, how long before..." "Before what?" "Before I'm completely..." He didn't finish the sentence. "I can't give you a timeline. Every patient is different." Ashford put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "But I will tell you that continuing to push yourself the way you have been is only going to accelerate any decline. You need to reduce stress, scale back your professional responsibilities, focus on your health." "I can't. The company will survive without you running it into the ground along with your body." Ashford's expression was stern. "Mr. Carrington, you're not invincible. And if you don't start taking this seriously, you're going to end up significantly more impaired than you are now." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Ashford laying out recommendations that Ethan accepted with visible reluctance. When the doctor finally left with his entourage, Claire and Ethan sat in silence. "That was perfect," Ethan said finally. "Ashford's going to report to Torres that I'm declining. She'll use it to push for the emergency vote. And when I show up and prove I'm still competent enough to fight, it'll make her look reactionary." And if she wins the vote anyway? She won't, because we're going to spend the next week convincing the swing vote that I'm wounded but not broken, fighting but not defeated. He looked at her with an intensity that made her chest tight. Think you can handle one more performance? Claire thought about Ashford's kind concern and fake diagnosis. About the residents taking notes on a condition that didn't exist. About the elaborate infrastructure of lies they'd built and the jobs riding on its success. Yes, she said. I can handle it. They discharged Ethan that evening with instructions to rest and reduce stress, instructions everyone knew he wouldn't follow. Claire rode back to the estate in the same car, Vance driving in silence while she and Ethan sat in the back and pretended the previous 12 hours hadn't fundamentally altered something between them. The week that followed was brutal. 3 more board meetings, each one a carefully choreographed battle where Claire provided medical updates and Ethan demonstrated just enough weakness to look vulnerable and just enough strength to seem worth fighting for. Torres pushed hard for immediate leadership transfer. Chen added his voice to hers. Webb stayed quiet but watchful. And the swing vote, a woman named Patricia Zhao, who'd built her career on being unpredictable, watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. On the Thursday before the emergency vote, Zhao requested a private meeting with Claire. They met in a conference room on neutral ground, a law office downtown that specialized in corporate warfare. Zhao arrived alone, which was somehow more intimidating than if she'd brought an army of lawyers. Miss Whitmore, thank you for meeting with me. Of course. Claire sat across from her and tried to project confidence she didn't feel. Zhao was 60, maybe older, with the kind of face that gave nothing away and hands that moved with precise economy. She laid out a file on the table between them. I've reviewed your assessments, all of them, including the ones you've submitted to the board and the ones Dr. Ashford provided after his evaluation. She opened the file. They're very thorough, very professional, and very convenient. Claire's stomach dropped. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean that your observations perfectly support the narrative that Ethan Carrington is fighting a noble but losing battle against catastrophic injury. They provide just enough decline to suggest he's in trouble, but not so much that he appears immediately incompetent. Zhao looked up. It's almost too perfect. I document what I observe. I'm sure you do. Zhao pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a report from a private investigator I hired. It details your financial situation before accepting this position. $48,000 in debt, threatened with legal action, desperate enough to take a job that appeared too good to be true. Claire's mouth went dry. Now, I'm not suggesting you've done anything illegal, Zhao continued. Your credentials are legitimate, your assessments are technically sound, but I am questioning whether your judgment might be influenced by the fact that Ethan Carrington owns your debt and controls your financial future. He paid what I owed. You're not compromised. I know. You're professional and ethical and completely trustworthy. Zhao's smile was sharp. The question is whether the board will believe that when Torres inevitably discovers your financial situation and uses it to discredit everything you've testified to. The room felt too small, too hot. Claire forced herself to breathe evenly. What do you want? She asked. The truth. Zhao leaned forward. Not the truth you've documented for the board, not the truth Ethan wants everyone to believe. The actual truth about his condition. I've told you the truth. You've told me what you've been instructed to tell me. There's a difference. Zhao's expression softened slightly. Miss Whitmore, Claire, I've been on this board for 15 years. I've watched Ethan build this company from his father's failing legacy into something that actually helps people. I respect him. But I also know when I'm being played. I'm not, yes, you are. And so am I. And so is everyone else in this situation. Zhao closed the file. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me the truth. I'm going to decide whether that truth changes my vote. And depending on what you say, I'll either help Ethan win or I'll help Torres take him down. Your choice. Claire looked at the woman across from her and saw something she hadn't expected. Not hostility, not manipulation, just exhaustion and a desire for honesty in a world built on calculated deception. She made a decision that would either save everything or destroy it. He can walk, Claire said quietly. Zhao didn't react, just waited. The paralysis is real in the sense that he was injured and required surgery, But the extent of the disability is exaggerated. He's maintained the appearance of being wheelchair-bound to make his enemies underestimate him, while he consolidates power and removes the people trying to destroy the company. And you've been helping him maintain that lie. I've been documenting what I observed during sessions where he performs paralysis, which makes my assessments technically accurate while supporting a false narrative. Claire met Zhao's eyes. I know it's unethical. I know it probably violates a dozen professional standards, but I also know that if Torres succeeds, 200,000 people lose their jobs. And I couldn't stand by and let that happen. Silence. Zhao studied her with an expression Claire couldn't read. How many people know? Zhao asked finally. Me, Vance, Margaret, a handful of security personnel. That's it. Not the board loyalists? No. Ethan didn't want anyone to know who didn't absolutely need to. Smart. Zhao stood and walked to the window. I'm going to tell you something that doesn't leave this room. Torres isn't working alone. She's backed by a consortium that's been buying up shares through shell companies for 18 months. If she gets control, she's planning to liquidate the company's assets and sell off the profitable divisions to the highest bidder. Everything else, all the programs Ethan built that actually help people, gets shut down. Claire's chest tightened. How do you know? Because they approached me 6 months ago and offered me a board seat with the new structure if I helped them take down Ethan. Zhao turned back. I said no, but I've been watching them move pieces into position ever since. This emergency vote is their endgame. Then why haven't you warned Ethan? Because I needed to know if he was actually worth saving, if he was really fighting for the company or just protecting his ego. Zhao's smile was grim. You just answered that question. What are you going to do? I'm going to vote to keep Ethan exactly where he is, and then I'm going to help him destroy Torres and everyone backing her. Zhao picked up her file. But he's going to owe me, significantly. What do you want? Transparency. Real transparency. Not this performance he's been giving. Zhao moved toward the door. When this is over, Ethan and I are going to have a very frank conversation about leadership and trust and the fact that I just saved his empire. He won't like it, but he'll do it, because the alternative is I tell the board everything you just told me. She left. Claire sat alone in the conference room and tried to figure out if she'd just saved Ethan or sentenced him to a different kind of defeat. Her encrypted phone buzzed, a message from Ethan. Zhao just left. What did you tell her? Claire stared at the screen. Then she typed, everything. She's voting with us. The response took 3 minutes. You gambled our entire strategy on trusting someone we don't control. Yes. Another pause. Why? Because she asked for the truth. And I'm tired of lying. The final message came 10 minutes later. We'll discuss this tonight. My office. 8 p.m. Claire went back to the estate and spent the hours until 8, preparing for what she knew would be either a reckoning or an ending. When she finally walked into Ethan's office, she found him standing by the windows, backlit by city lights, looking like every billionaire villain from every movie she'd ever seen, except he turned around and his expression wasn't angry. It was relieved. You gave me Zhao's vote, he said. That wins the board. I know. You also exposed everything to someone who could destroy us if she changes her mind. I know that too. Ethan moved toward her, closing the distance until they were close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the exhaustion he never quite managed to hide. Why did you trust her? He asked quietly. Because she reminded me of you, tired of the games, wanting something real. Claire held his gaze. And because I'm done being part of a lie, even a necessary one. The lie is all that's keeping us alive. Then maybe it's time to risk dying. The words hung between them, weighted with meanings neither of them was ready to name. Ethan reached out and touched her face, and the contact was electric. After the vote, he said, after we win and Torres is gone and the company is secure. What? I'm going to tell you everything. No more lies, no more performance. Everything. Promise? Promise. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd imagined and everything she'd been afraid to want. When they finally broke apart, Claire was shaking and Ethan looked like a man who just made a decision that would either save him or destroy him. The vote is tomorrow, he said. Are you ready? Claire thought about boardrooms and lies, and the 200,000 people whose futures rested on their ability to maintain a performance for one more day. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." She wasn't, but she would be, because tomorrow everything would either fall apart or fall into place. And either way, the lie would finally start to crack. The boardroom was different this time. Same mahogany table, same floor-to-ceiling windows, same portraits of dead men who'd built empires. But the air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes, and everyone in the room knew they were about to witness something that would fundamentally reshape everything. Claire sat in the observation section along the wall, her tablet balanced on her knees, trying to look like a medical professional there to provide expert testimony rather than a woman who'd kissed her patient 12 hours ago and couldn't stop thinking about it. Ethan was already positioned at the head of the table in his wheelchair, looking exactly as exhausted and determined as he'd appeared in every previous meeting. The performance was flawless. Torres called the meeting to order with barely concealed satisfaction. "We're here to vote on emergency temporary leadership transfer due to Mr. Carrington's continued medical decline and inability to effectively manage the company's operations." "That's not what we're voting on," Patricia Zhao said calmly. "We're voting on whether to remove a sitting CEO based on medical speculation and political maneuvering. Let's be honest about what this is." Torres's smile went sharp. "Ms. Zhao, if you have concerns about the legitimacy of this vote, I have concerns about the timing, the motivation, and the fact that you've been meeting with external investors who have a vested interest in destabilizing this company." Zhao pulled out a file and laid it on the table. "Care to explain these meeting records?" The temperature in the room dropped. Torres went very still. "Those meetings were exploratory in nature. They were negotiations for your position in a restructured board after a hostile takeover, which makes this vote not about Ethan's fitness, but about your financial interests." Zhao's voice was ice. "So before we proceed, I think we need to address the actual conflict of interest in this room." Claire watched Chen and Webb exchange glances. The other board members shifted in their seats, and Ethan sat perfectly still, his expression carefully neutral, while Zhao systematically dismantled Torres's credibility. "You have no proof of any impropriety," Torres said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "I have meeting records, wire transfers, and signed NDAs that your lawyers clearly didn't redact thoroughly enough." Zhao smiled. "Would you like me to continue, or would you prefer to withdraw the vote and resign quietly?" "This is absurd. Harold, Marcus, you both know." But Chen was already standing. "I think Ms. Zhao has raised valid concerns about the impartiality of this process. I move to table the vote pending an independent investigation into potential conflicts of interest." "Second," said one of Ethan's loyalists. Torres looked around the table, seeing the support she'd counted on evaporating in real time. "You're making a mistake, all of you. Ethan Carrington is not the man you think he is." "No," Ethan said quietly. "I'm not." Everyone turned to look at him. "I'm not the man any of you think I am, and it's time you knew the truth." He placed his hands on the wheelchair armrests. "Claire, would you come here, please?" Claire's heart stopped. This wasn't the plan. They were supposed to win the vote, secure the board, and deal with the truth later. But Ethan was looking at her with an expression that said the plan had just changed, and she needed to trust him. She stood and walked to the front of the room on legs that felt disconnected from her body. "Miss Whitmore has been providing my physical therapy for the past 2 months," Ethan continued. "She's documented my condition extensively. She's testified to this board about my prognosis, and she's done all of it while maintaining the professional standards expected of her position." Claire had no idea where this was going. "She's also been part of the most elaborate deception this company has ever staged." Ethan's voice was steady. "Because the truth is, I'm not paralyzed. I haven't been for months." The silence was absolute. Torres recovered first. You're admitting to fraud. I'm admitting to strategic misdirection. There's a difference." Ethan looked around the table. 6 months ago, someone tried to kill me. The attack was sophisticated, well-funded, and designed to look like an accident. I survived, but I was injured badly enough to require surgery. During my recovery, I learned that the attack was commissioned by a consortium of investors who wanted to destabilize the company and acquire it at a fraction of its value. He paused, letting that sink in. I also learned that several members of this board were involved in facilitating that acquisition, providing inside information, undermining confidence in the company's leadership, creating conditions for a hostile takeover. His eyes landed on Torres. So I made a choice. I chose to appear weaker than I was while I identified everyone involved and built a case against them. This is insane, Webb said. You're claiming a conspiracy. I'm stating facts, and I have evidence. Ethan nodded to Vance, who'd appeared in the doorway with a box of files. Financial records, meeting transcripts, wire transfers, communications between board members and the investors trying to acquire this company. All of it legally obtained and verified. Vance began distributing folders. Claire watched board members' faces change as they reviewed the contents. Shock, anger, and in Torres's case, something close to panic. None of this is admissible, Torres said. Even if it's real, it doesn't need to be admissible in court. It just needs to be true. Ethan's voice was cold. And it is true. You've been working with external investors to take down this company. You arranged for Dr. Ashford to provide a diagnosis that would support forcing me out. You've been feeding information about our operations to competitors and sabotaging deals that would strengthen our position. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. Vance, would you play the recording from March 15th? Vance pressed a button on his tablet. Torres's voice filled the room, crystal clear, discussing timeline and strategy with someone whose voice Claire didn't recognize. The conversation was damning, explicit, impossible to explain away. Torres stood abruptly. This meeting is over. I'm contacting our legal team. Sit down, Zhao said, or I'll have security escort you out in handcuffs. Your choice. Torres sat. Ethan continued, and his voice had lost all pretense of weakness. Here's what's going to happen. Torres, Chen, and Webb, you're going to resign from this board effective immediately. You'll sign agreements acknowledging your conflicts of interest and agreeing not to disparage the company or interfere with its operations. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges for corporate espionage and attempted fraud. You can't force us to resign, Chen said. No, but I can release this evidence to every media outlet in the country and let your reputations get destroyed in public. Your choice. Ethan's smile was cold. Personally, I'd prefer the quiet resignation. But I'm flexible. Webb was already pulling out his phone, presumably calling his lawyers. Torres looked like she wanted to flip the table. Chen just looked old and defeated. The rest of you, Ethan said to the remaining board members, will vote to accept these resignations and authorize a full audit of the company's operations over the past 18 months. We're going to identify everyone who was involved in this attempted takeover, and we're going to make sure it never happens again. And your paralysis? One of the loyalists asked carefully. If you're not actually disabled, I was injured. I did require surgery and extensive recovery, but I maintained the appearance of being more impaired than I actually was as a strategic decision. Ethan's hands tightened on the armrests. That decision allowed me to identify and neutralize a threat to this company and everyone who depends on it. I won't apologize for protecting 200,000 jobs. But you lied to us, another board member said. You let us believe. I let you believe what you needed to believe to keep you safe. If you'd known the truth, you would have been potential targets or potential leaks. Ethan's expression was hard. I trust you to run this company, but I couldn't trust you with information that could get you killed. The logic was brutal and probably accurate. Claire watched it land on various faces around the table. Acceptance, anger, reluctant understanding. What about Miss Whitmore? Zhao asked. She's been providing false medical assessments. She's been providing accurate assessments based on the condition I presented during therapy sessions, Ethan corrected. Everything she documented was true to what she observed. The fact that I was performing a specific condition doesn't make her observations fraudulent. It was a thin defense, but technically accurate. Claire felt every eye in the room turn to her. Is that true? Zhao asked. Claire thought about lying, about maintaining the fiction for just a little longer, but she was so tired of lies. Yes, she said. Mr. Carrington presented with symptoms consistent with incomplete spinal cord injury and limited mobility. I documented those symptoms accurately. I didn't know the extent to which his condition was being controlled until several weeks into treatment. But you continued documenting after you knew? I continued providing medical care to a patient who was under significant physical and psychological stress. The fact that some of his limitations were strategic rather than purely medical doesn't change the fact that he needed therapy. It wasn't quite the truth, but it was close enough. Zhao studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I think we've established sufficient context. Let's vote on the resignations. The vote was unanimous. Torres, Chen, and Webb were out. The audit was approved. And just like that, the war Ethan had been fighting for 6 months was over. Almost. The meeting dissolved into chaos, lawyers being called, security escorting the disgraced board members out, loyalists gathering around Ethan with a mixture of relief and residual shock. Claire slipped out during the confusion and made it halfway down the hall before Vance caught up with her. That was not the plan, she said. Ethan changed it, decided the best defense was full transparency. Vance's expression was unreadable. He's asking for you, his office, now. Claire found him there 15 minutes later, standing by the windows, no wheelchair in sight. He changed out of the formal suit into jeans and a shirt with rolled sleeves, and the transformation was startling. He looked younger, less controlled, almost human. That was insane, Claire said from the doorway. That was necessary. Ethan turned to face her. Torres was going to expose everything anyway. I saw it in her face when Zhao started showing the evidence. She was going to burn it all down rather than go quietly. So I took control of the narrative first. By admitting to fraud in front of the entire board. By admitting to strategic misdirection and providing context that made it justifiable. He moved toward her. The difference matters. Does it? Because I just watched you destroy 3 people's careers and admit to an elaborate conspiracy, and I can't tell if you're a hero or a villain. I'm neither. I'm just someone who was trying to survive. Ethan stopped a few feet away. And I couldn't have done it without you. Don't make me complicit in something I'm still not sure was right. It saved 200,000 jobs, Claire. It stopped a takeover that would have gutted this company and destroyed communities that depend on our operations. How is that not right? Because you lied. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. You lied to your board, to your investors, to everyone who trusted you. And you made me lie too. You built this elaborate performance and cast me in it without asking if I wanted the role. I asked you to stay multiple times. I gave you the option to leave. After I'd already signed a contract that would destroy my career if I broke it. After you'd paid my debt and made me financially dependent on you. That's not a choice, Ethan. That's coercion wrapped in expensive paper. The words hung between them. Ethan's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something that looked like pain. You're right, he said quietly. I manipulated you. I used your desperation and your skill and your integrity to build a lie that served my purposes. And I told myself it was justified because the alternative was worse. But that doesn't change what I did to you. Claire felt her anger deflate slightly. So what now? Now I keep my promise. I tell you everything. He gestured to the couch. Sit. This is going to take a while. She sat. He paced, and over the next hour he told her the full story. The attack 6 months ago hadn't been a car accident. It had been an ambush. 3 men with military training who'd forced his car off the road and shot him twice before Vance's team arrived. He'd survived but sustained serious injuries, including a fractured spine that required immediate surgery. During recovery, Vance had identified the financial trail connecting the attack to a consortium of investors led by Torres. They'd been planning the takeover for over a year, slowly buying up shares through shell companies and positioning themselves to strike the moment Ethan showed weakness. So Ethan had given them weakness. He'd exaggerated his injuries, staged the paralysis, and used the time to build a case while appearing too incapacitated to be a threat. The wheelchair was bait, he said. Every board meeting, every medical assessment, every public appearance where I looked weak and vulnerable, it was all designed to make them confident enough to move openly. And it worked. They got sloppy. They left trails, and Vance collected every piece of evidence we needed. But you couldn't use it without revealing you'd been lying about your condition, Claire said. Exactly, which is where you came in. I needed a physical therapist who was good enough to notice the inconsistencies, but desperate enough to keep working despite them. Someone who could document my supposed decline while maintaining enough professional credibility that the board would believe your assessments. A prop. A key piece of the strategy, Ethan corrected. And I chose you specifically because I knew you'd figure it out eventually. I needed someone smart enough to understand what was really happening, but ethical enough to be genuinely conflicted about it. Why? Because if you'd just gone along without question, your testimony wouldn't have been convincing. But if you struggled with it, if you were clearly uncomfortable but still committed to doing your job, that made it real. He finally stopped pacing and looked at her. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I used you. I'm sorry I put you in an impossible position. And I'm sorry I let myself care about you while knowing I was manipulating you. The last part hit her like a physical blow. You care about me? More than I should. More than is probably smart given that I hired you under false pretenses and built our entire relationship on a foundation of strategic deception. His smile was bitter. But yes, I care about you, and I have no right to ask you to stay now that the lie is over. Claire sat there processing everything he'd told her. The attack, the conspiracy, the elaborate performance he'd maintained for 6 months. The fact that she'd been a carefully selected tool in a plan designed to save a company and destroy his enemies. And underneath all of that, the truth that he'd kissed her last night, like a man who had nothing left to lose. What happens now? She asked. With us, I mean, not the company. I don't know. That depends on you. Ethan moved closer. Your contract is void as of today. The performance is over. You can leave with a reference that'll open any door in medicine, a severance package that'll set you up for years, and the knowledge that you helped save 200,000 jobs. Or you can stay, not as my physical therapist, I don't need one anymore, but as... He stopped, searching for the right words. As someone I trust, someone I want in my life, someone I need. Claire's heart was hammering. That's not a job offer. No, it's not. What is it then? An invitation to figure out what we are when we're not performing for an audience. To see if what we built during the lie can survive the truth. He sat down beside her. I know I have no right to ask. I know I've given you every reason to walk away. But I'm asking anyway. Claire looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion that was finally showing through now that the performance was over, at the vulnerability he was letting her see, at the man underneath the billionaire strategist who'd orchestrated an elaborate deception to save his company. I need you to promise me something, she said. Anything. No more lies, ever. If we're going to try this, whatever this is, I need complete honesty. Even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, no more strategic omissions or carefully edited truths. I promise. Ethan's voice was steady. No more lies. And if I stay, it's not as an employee or a prop or a strategic asset. It's as an equal, someone you consult, not someone you manipulate. Agreed. And we're going to deal with the fact that you created an entire fictional medical condition and I documented it professionally. Because that's going to come back eventually, and I need to know we have a plan. The legal team is already working on it. Your assessments were accurate to what you observed. My performance was the variable, not your medical judgment. We can defend that. He reached for her hand. But yes, we'll deal with it, together. Claire looked at their joined hands and tried to reconcile the man who'd manipulated her with the man who was asking her to stay. They were the same person, complex, flawed, willing to do terrible things for what he believed were the right reasons. And she was still here, still wanting to stay despite everything. I'm not saying I forgive you, she said. Not yet. You're going to have to earn that. I know, and I'm not sure I trust you completely. It's going to take time. I understand. But I'm staying, for now. We'll see where it goes. Ethan's smile was real this time, reaching his eyes. For now is enough. He kissed her then, and it was different from last night. Less desperate, more certain. The kiss of two people who'd stopped performing and started being honest. They were interrupted by Vance clearing his throat from the doorway. Sorry to intrude, but we have a situation. Ethan pulled back with obvious reluctance. What kind of situation? Torres didn't go quietly. She's talking to reporters about your deception, claiming fraud and manipulation. Vance's expression was grim. It's going to be all over the news within the hour. Let it. Ethan stood, pulling Claire up with him. I'm done hiding. Release everything. The evidence against Torres, the attempted takeover, all of it. If she wants to fight in public, we'll fight in public. That's going to create a media storm. Good. Let everyone see exactly who was trying to destroy this company and why I did what I did to stop them. Ethan's voice was hard. And make sure the legal team is ready to file charges if she crosses the line from criticism to defamation. Vance nodded and left. Claire looked at Ethan with something between admiration and concern. You're really going to war with her. I'm really going to finish what she started. She wanted to destroy me. Now she gets to learn what that actually looks like. The media storm hit exactly as predicted. By evening, every news outlet was running stories about the Carrington Industries board scandal, the attempted takeover, and Ethan's admission that he'd exaggerated his paralysis. The coverage was split. Some outlets portrayed him as a brilliant strategist protecting his company, others as a fraud who'd manipulated everyone around him. Claire watched the coverage from Ethan's office, feeling surreal as her face appeared in some of the reports. Physical therapist caught in Billionaire's elaborate deception, questions about medical ethics, speculation about her role in the conspiracy. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Former colleagues, medical boards, reporters wanting statements. She ignored all of it. This is going to destroy my career, she said. No, it's not. Ethan was on his third call with lawyers, managing the crisis with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he'd been preparing for this moment. The legal team is already drafting statements clarifying your position. You were hired to provide medical care. You documented what you observed accurately. The fact that I was controlling what you observed doesn't make you complicit in fraud. The medical board isn't going to see it that way. Then we'll fight the medical board, with lawyers better than theirs and evidence that proves you acted within professional standards at all times. He ended his current call and moved to where she was standing. I told you I'd protect you. I meant it. You can't protect me from the consequences of your choices. Watch me. He was true to his word. Over the next week, Ethan's legal team systematically dismantled every attempt to implicate Claire in wrongdoing. They provided her documentation, her session notes, her assessments, all of it showing clinical accuracy and professional judgment. They demonstrated that she'd had no access to Ethan's real medical records and no reason to question the condition he was presenting. The medical board investigated and eventually cleared her. The reporters moved on to other scandals. And slowly the storm subsided. Torres, Chenman, and Webb weren't as lucky. Federal prosecutors picked up the case and began investigating the takeover attempt. Criminal charges were filed. Assets were frozen. The consortium behind the plot scattered, trying to distance themselves from the legal disaster. And Carrington Industries restructured its board, brought in new members committed to transparency, and emerged stronger than before. 3 months later, Claire sat in a coffee shop across from her cousin, the one she'd sent money to when her first paycheck cleared. They were catching up on everything that had happened since Claire had disappeared into Ethan's world. So you're dating a billionaire who faked being paralyzed and used you to help destroy his enemies, her cousin summarized. That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most disturbing. I can't decide which. Both, Claire said. Definitely both. And you're okay with it? I'm working on being okay with it. We're in therapy. She smiled at her cousin's expression. Couples therapy. Because apparently when you build a relationship on an elaborate deception, you need professional help to navigate the aftermath. Is it helping? Surprisingly, yes. Our therapist is terrifyingly perceptive and doesn't let Ethan strategize his way out of emotional honesty. Claire sipped her coffee. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's worth it. Because you love him. Claire hadn't said it out loud yet. Hadn't let herself fully acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding for months. Yes, she admitted, because I love him, despite everything. Maybe because of everything. Her cousin shook her head. You always did have terrible taste in men. He's not terrible. He's complicated. He's manipulative. He's strategic. There's a difference. Is there? Claire thought about it. About the man who'd hired her under false pretenses. and the man who'd stood in front of his board and admitted to everything, about the calculated deception and the raw honesty, about the performance and the person underneath. "I think so," she said finally. "I think he did terrible things for what he believed were the right reasons, and I think he's trying to be better. We both are. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Promise me that if he ever asks you to help him fake another medical condition, you'll say no and call me immediately so I can come get you." Claire laughed. "Deal." 6 months after the board meeting, Ethan stood in front of the company's annual shareholders gathering and made an announcement that surprised everyone. Carrington Industries is establishing a foundation dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and supporting workers affected by corporate malfeasance. We'll be funding legal defense for employees who expose wrongdoing, providing financial assistance during transitions, and advocating for stronger protections against retaliation. The room erupted in applause. Claire watched from the wings, no longer his therapist, but present as someone he'd specifically invited to witness this moment. "I spent 6 months lying to protect this company," Ethan continued when the applause died down. "I manipulated people I cared about and made choices I'm not proud of. I did it because I believed the alternative was worse, but I also learned that the systems designed to protect companies often fail the people who depend on them. So we're going to change that, starting now." More applause. Claire felt her throat tighten. After the presentation, they walked through the gardens at the estate. The same gardens Claire had seen on her first day, when she'd been desperate and drowning and willing to accept any job that would save her. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "The foundation." "Yes, I did. Because you were right. I used your desperation against you. I used everyone's vulnerabilities to serve my purposes. And even if it was justified, it wasn't right." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "The foundation is my attempt to make sure that what happened to you, being trapped in an impossible situation because of debt and lack of options, doesn't happen to other people. That's going to cost you millions. Billions, probably. I'm okay with that." Claire looked at him and saw the man she'd come to love. Flawed, complex, capable of both ruthless strategy and genuine compassion. Not perfect, not even close, but trying to be better. "I forgive you," she said. Ethan blinked. "What?" "For manipulating me, for using me, for all of it. I forgive you." Claire moved closer. "Not because what you did was okay, but because I understand why you did it. And because you're actually trying to make amends instead of just apologizing and moving on. Claire, and I love you, which is probably stupid and definitely complicated, but it's true." She smiled at his stunned expression. "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." Ethan pulled her close and kissed her with an intensity that suggested words weren't necessary. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling. "I love you too. Have for months, since you called me out for lying on your second day and refused to let me intimidate you." He brushed hair away from her face. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, and the most honest, and you make me want to be better." "You are better." "I'm trying to be, with your help." They stood there in the gardens as the sun set, two people who'd built something real out of lies and manipulation and the gradual revelation of truth. It wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect, but it was theirs. A year after Claire had walked through the estate gates for the first time, she stood in those same gardens wearing a dress that actually fit her life now. Expensive but not ostentatious, elegant but practical. The foundation was thriving. The company was stronger than ever. And she'd started working at a rehabilitation center Ethan had funded, helping patients who actually needed her skills rather than performing for an audience. Ethan found her watching the sunset and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Regret anything?" he asked. Claire thought about the desperate woman who'd accepted a job that seemed too good to be true, about the lies and manipulation and gradual revelation of a truth more complex than she'd imagined, about the love that had grown in the spaces between performance and reality. "Not a single thing," she said. "Not even the part where I faked paralysis and used you as part of an elaborate corporate strategy? Especially not that part, because it brought me here." Claire turned in his arms. "To you. To this life. To knowing I helped save something worth saving. 200,000 jobs. That too. But I meant you. She kissed him softly. You were worth saving. So were you. They stood there as the sky turned from gold to purple to dark. Two imperfect people who'd found each other in the middle of a war neither of them had been fully prepared to fight. The lie that brought them together was over. The truth they'd built was just beginning. And somewhere in the city beyond the estate walls, 200,000 people went to work at a company that had survived because one man had been willing to fake weakness, and one woman had been desperate enough to help him maintain it. They'd never know the full story. They didn't need to. What mattered was that the jobs existed, that families were fed, that communities thrived. And in the quiet of the gardens, Claire and Ethan held each other and knew that sometimes the most important truths grow out of the most elaborate lies. Not because deception is noble, but because the choice to stop lying, to strip away the performance and risk being seen completely, is the most honest thing two people can do. The wheelchair sat in storage somewhere, a prop from a performance that had saved an empire and destroyed the people who'd tried to take it. Claire never asked what Ethan had done with it. Some symbols were better left in the past. What mattered was the future, and theirs looked bright,